I know that when I did the first of these videos, I sat down and recorded them all in one sitting, and I reflected on that and decided it was a really bad idea. Well, this is the fourth video in a row that I'm recording in one day, but it's just because I'm trying hard to unpack some really complicated stuff, and I get derailed and I get distracted. So there's nothing I've said so far that I didn't think needed saying. I'm just hoping that in many ways what we're doing is I'm demonstrating to you that we can't just you can't just skim through a book and hope to understand what it's all about. I've spent 10 years thinking about this stuff. In fact, maybe not all 10 of them, because in the beginning I had no access to it. And then I sort of found over time that a lot of these things can be downloaded illegally. The great thing about that topic is that now QPress has versions that you can download as ebooks from their website. But I do want to hasten to add that Jerry's wife, upon his passing, said that she wanted all of his materials to be in the public domain, and so with that information out there, you can use a certain amount of you can feel safe in using what used to be pirated materials, because quite simply put, Jerry kind of dismissed everything that he had taught in the past as he came up with new ideas, and so he didn't care what was happening with his books. The whole world changed during the time that Jerry was bringing out this stuff, and I think that maybe something that we're trying to deal with as an international community of instrumentalists is that that people have an unbelievable access to this information that wasn't available to them before. One of the reasons that there are so many sort of 20th century brass gurus that may contradict each other but are all considered by their followers to be the only one who had the knowledge is because, let's say you're living in Chicago in the 70s. Well, you don't have that many people to go to. You're certainly not going to have easy access to Jerome Callatt or my mind went blank. The guy who had his studio downstairs from Jerry's, the Six Notes guy. I find it hilarious when I can't remember this stuff, because I used to be so obsessed. I used to be able to just reel off, I knew all the names, I knew all their books, I knew all the yes, I knew where every idea came from. Anyway, let's not. One of the things that I wanted to mention in the previous video, which is going to take us down the path of discussing use of air and the contradictions around it, is a sentence that, let's see, let's make sure I want to do this right. So it's not on that page. It's right, okay, apologies for being really lapsed here before I started the video. I'm going to give myself a couple seconds to find it. If I don't, I'm just going to misquote it to you. But please believe that it's absolutely in here. Right, that took a needlessly long length of time. The other guy's name was Carmine Caruso. Sorry for that. I remembered it whilst looking through the book. So the sentence that I wanted to sort of focus on a little in this episode goes like this. Always blow harder the higher you play and resist the air. Do not allow it to enter the mouthpiece cup. Now, that's probably one of the most controversial statements, but I think that actually it's maybe just the way that it's explained makes it sound like it's something it's not. First of all, we need to acknowledge quite simply that as you play higher notes on a brass instrument, less air, less quantity of air passes into the instrument. You could describe this from an aperture point of view. You could say that the aperture is more open, allowing more air through the trumpet as you play low notes, and that aperture closes as you ascend in pitch. You could say it like that. You could say that actually the aperture could stay exactly the same, and you just have to blow twice as hard. That's an idea that, although to a degree it can practically work, it's not going to give you the full range of notes of the instrument, and it's certainly not going to give you a full range of dynamics. In as much as we cannot say that everything is aperture control, we can also say that not everything is wind power. Now, there are a number of times in this book that Jerry mentions wind power. He says that you should feel all of the majority of the effort you put into playing should be felt in your inner body. He discusses using the abdominal muscles and pulling them in tightly as you play. I'm not going to go back to the book and find out whether... I know that in the Trumpet Yoga book, he talks about having the muscles here engaged at all times, whether you're playing high or low, whether you're playing softly or loudly. Always engage your core when you play. And this is one of those ideas that you've got to look at it and go, he taught this thing for for a solid 25 years before we started talking about the tongue in the TCE way. Now, when you look at all of the later material, he's talking about quantity of air. He's talking about using less air. He's talking about the problems with people overblowing. But he never says what he means. There's no instructions in the Mastering Superchops material about how to breathe and blow. He says you should be using about a third the amount of air that would be not used for any other technique. In the Trumpet Secrets book, I believe I think it's Secret 2, where he's talking about using less air. But at least in that book, he says you should blow all of the air to the tip of the tongue in this way. I think that after the Trumpet Secrets book, Jerry then started being more conscious of using a lesser quantity of air. And that became a very important part of his teaching as you then go forward in time. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is we're coming back to this idea of using compression and resistance. Now, it's been said to me by people who studied with Jerry for a long time that he used to use the words resistance and compression interchangeably. That is, he would say compression one day, he'd say resistance another day. And I think as well, it's also worth just adding in there that you could actually say air pressure as well. You could say air pressure, that means compression of air. You can say wind power. Now, those are words that you will find coming up in other methods, and I believe that it's probably best to avoid them, though he does use those words in this book. He does say you will find yourself using more wind power when you play the Superchops way. Now, this is the thing. We got a little... I would generally say, in the interest of being scientifically accurate, you cannot take airflow and replace it with air compression. You need to have the correct amount of both. But what I mean when I say use less air or use more air compression, use your embouchure to create resistance to the air stream as a means of controlling pitch. What we're trying to do is balance the equation of efficiency. Now, this is not coming from Jerome Kallett or anyone who's taught me. This is me saying stuff as I understand it. I got really into the idea of thinking about efficient trumpet playing when I was studying the TCE, because it's not that hard to sort of see that that's what we're going after. You're putting less in and you're getting more out. That is the definition of efficiency. So what we want to do in terms of balancing our equation is, if we could say that that the relationship between airflow and air compression results in our power or our sound. Now, what we want to do is minimize both air pressure and airflow. Now, we want this. What that means is, in order to have the most efficient playing technique, we don't want to use too much air, and we don't want to have too much air compression, because that'll make you sound like a donkey. But you need to have the right amount of both. And I believe, as a result of studying this system, that the right amount of compression is far greater than most people habitually use. And the right amount of airflow is far less than most people are taught to use and most people habitually use. And so we should increase compression by means of increasing resistance at the chops, i.e. playing with a smaller aperture. And we should focus much less on airflow, because it leads you down a path of opening the chops, of allowing the lips to collapse, of thinking about blowing through the whole trumpet, which is just a bad idea. It's just provably incorrect in many ways. So that's my understanding of where we're going with all of this stuff. Now, when you look at the material in the Superchops book, and certainly when you watch it on the video as well, there's so much talk about using more air. And there's a sentence in here: I don't want to do what I just did again and end up spending time flicking through this book. I know that before I make part 5, I'm going to have to sit down and read the whole book a couple times again. But here's a thing. You will find yourself using much more air, wind power than ever before. The faster you run out of air, the more correctly you are doing the Superchops method. The biggest and strongest men who have become my students all say they never could use their full body strength in playing before doing Superchops. Here's an important thing. Almost all of the strain of blowing the trumpet goes to the body, not the lips. Anyone can successfully perform Superchops from age 8 to 80. Okay, well that's an opinion. So yeah, this is a really interesting thing, because there is a section in this book, and there's a chapter in the Trumpet Secrets book, and they talk about using less air. It's acknowledged in the Superchops book, and it's acknowledged in the Trumpet Yoga book, that when you're playing loud double high Cs, almost no air enters the trumpet. Almost no air enters the mouthpiece cup. He said that all along, right since the 1970s. However, he also then basically contradicts himself on the video by saying, when you're doing the correct things with your lips, when you've got enough relaxation in the corners, and that's what permits you to have the central lip compression, for reasons that I discussed in the previous video. As soon as you're playing in that way, you will use more air. And he also says on the video, the more air that you can use on these simple exercises, which are scales and Herbert Clark's type stuff, the more air you can use on those exercises, the stronger player you will become. Stronger player you will become. Now, I've not really gone down that path very much, because the truth is, I think that now, in the TCE age, we know better. We know that we don't need to be thinking about building up wind power in that same way. However, in a musical context, when I am playing commercial music, I play in a salsa band, I play in a funk band. I've done a lot of, I do an awful lot of playing. I'm in a big band. I've got a big band gig tonight. It's often much simpler to think about playing in this way than it is to try and understand how the TCE tongue position is helping you to achieve the same thing. And that's opening up an interesting can of worms all about the psychological side of embouchure study, because something that I really like about the Superchops system, and I think I've said enough now that I can explain this, is it really just simplifies our understanding of how everything works. There aren't really any esoteric ideas. There's no trying to give really complex descriptions to the purpose of tongue level and all of this sort of stuff. There are just two things. There is the air power and there is the resistance to the air power. That is, and one results in the other anyway. So we can't think entirely about just blowing. I don't think that we should ever think about just blowing, but how he describes it in the book is that you should blow up to the lips. Do I have that one easy to... There we go again. I wonder if I have that one easy to access. It's not going to be right here. Yeah, but so you blow up to the chops, and then the resistance that you are achieving by gripping the lips against each other and by gripping inwards against the teeth, that's what's going to enable you to ascend in pitch. And it's as simple as that. And in many ways, you could argue that it's basically, we're just talking about aperture control. Now, I've brought up the word aperture a number of times. You need to know it doesn't come from Jerome Khalett. He doesn't. The only mention of the aperture in his talking and writing is that in the Trumpet Yoga book, he says the aperture should be much smaller than it is described in other methods. And he also says in the Mastering Superchops material that you don't want to have an aperture. So it should all be about friction. Now that's a whole other topic. I mentioned friction there. He mentions it later, but his idea was that friction between the parts that vibrate is what creates the core of your sound, and what gives you that big butter sound that you ain't going to get nowhere else. That it all comes from that friction of parts rubbing against each other. Okay, so there is I think we've reached a point that I'm quite satisfied with in terms of the basics of Superchops. I'm going to go away and read this book a couple more times, and I am going to come back and I am going to continue this topic because a big part of me feels that this is probably one of the best understandings of embouchure function. If somebody asks me what an embouchure does, what does the lip do? How does it achieve that? How is this different from other systems of playing, and why do they not work and this does? Or why do I believe that this is a more effective way to learn to play the trumpet than another method? It's all in here. And I really think that you're seeing the seeds of the ways that certain other people teach. And I might be putting my foot in it by saying this, but Bobby Shew, for example, or Roger Ingram, the way that they talk about playing, you can see that the seeds of their ideas may have ties back to this. And we do know, because of podcasts that Roger Ingram has done, that he had a series of lessons with Jerome Khalett when he was in New York. And we know that Bobby Shew was taught by Jerome Khalett for a time now. We also know that Bobby Shew studies very hard and probably doesn't agree with much, if anything, of this material, but they knew each other back in the day. I mean, Jerry knew everyone. He knew, knew Roy Stevens. He met Maynard a bunch of times. He knew Maurice Andre. Anyway, let's tie this one up, and I'll come back with episode 5 on this topic. I mean, I'm looking at this and thinking, I could post twice a week for the next 2 weeks and get it out, or maybe I'll post one a week for a month. I'm quite tempted to do that because it suits my schedule much better, and I want to be posting. I want to be posting regularly more than frequently, so that is on a regular schedule, as opposed to I've just made 4 videos, I'm going to put out 1 a day for the next 4 days. That's not really going to help us in terms of hacking the YouTube algorithm. So there we go. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Please share this material with anyone that you think will find it helpful, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye for now.